Hello there, peace be upon you, and welcome to Rational Religion, where we make sense of spirituality.
On today's episode of Believe You Me, we're going to be asking the question, does science disprove God?
So, Omar, we don't need to believe in God anymore, surely, do we? I mean, we've got science and it's given us the answers to everything. We know how the universe came to be.
Heretical.
We know how the universe came into its current form. We know how life started. We know how life evolved. What place is there in God for our understanding of the universe?
This would be a somewhat more valid person if it was 150 years ago. But it's not. It's 2017 now. 17.
Oh, yeah.
The reason is because, let's talk about the 19th century, which is when the current materialist scientific mindset largely solidified.
Okay.
So in the 19th century, that's when you had the intellectuals of their day basically thinking they had it all figured out. They thought they understood the origin of the universe. They thought they understood the origin of life. They thought they understood the evolution of life. And in all their theories for these things, they did away with God. They thought, we don't need a designing God anymore. We can finally get rid of the baggage of religion which they'd been shedding for centuries before that. And that was also reflected in the social theories of the day. Marxism. Let's get rid of the opiate for the masses of religion. Freud, it's all just it's an imaginative philosophy to make us feel better.
Origin of the universe. Let's go from that one then.
Okay, so we'll go through them one by one then.
Sure.
So they believe the universe is eternal, pretty much.
So it came from forever, is going to keep on going for forever.
Yeah, it's like an eternal arrow.
Yeah.
Right? And it keeps on going. It's always been here. You don't need God to have started it off.
Right.
That's the key thing. It's not like in basically all the religious texts, to be honest, including the Holy Quran, say that God created the heavens and the earth. That there was some kind of moment or act of creation.
Yeah.
Which implies that the universe is not eternal. Which
Yeah.
implies that the universe had a beginning.
Yeah.
The scientists of their day thought we don't need anything more. We don't need anything. We don't need a creating God.
Yeah.
Okay. And then with the origin of life, that's sort of the next big thing in a way.
Yeah.
The next singularity, if you will.
Yeah.
The origin of life, they thought that the first
They just
cell...
thought it was just protoplasm, just really basic stuff.
Yeah, the protoplasm was this sort of primordial, chemical, very simple...
Uniform thing which had no complexity to it, and it was just the stuff at the bottom of the sea, you drudged it up. In fact, I remember there was a well-known scientist who drudged up a lot of dirt from the bottom of the sea, sent it in a big bottle to Darwin, and said, this is the origin of life. Yeah. This is the basis material of life. And they thought it was just homogeneous mud. Well, it was homogeneous mud. But they thought that was what life came from.
Yes, they must have been quite shocked when they looked in the microscope. What's it all moving? What is that? So they thought it was really simple, right?
Yeah,
and you had Huxley and Haeckel, who are like two of Darwin's greatest disciples, great proponents of this idea. You had plenty of other scientists as well, who thought that life was really simple.
Yeah.
So they basically thought that, biology is just a slightly special form of chemistry.
Yeah.
Not that difficult to make, and as science progresses, we'll definitely figure out what life is.
Yeah.
And it'll obviously be a necessary outcome of having enough chemicals in the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that was like, okay, alright, the universe has always been here, life's really easy. And then evolution, they were like, well, obviously, that homogeneous mud. We have different varieties of homogeneous mud.
There's the garden variety, there's your industrial homogeneous mud.
Bottom of a well, inside of a pipe in the industrial bit. I don't know. They need to know where we're going with this. They thought you had lots of varieties of original protoplasm, let's say, or protoplasm could create different varieties because protoplasm could replicate itself.
Yeah.
That's what Darwin's theory says.
And it was really simple. That's the most key point that they made.
So they said life came from this really simple stuff. This stuff could replicate itself,
And it became other stuff over time.
No, and it became slightly different stuff.
Yeah.
And you have lots of slightly different types of this simple stuff. And eventually natural selection does its wonders. And here we are.
It's a very satisfying theory.
Sophisticated people.
Anyway, so what is the reality of life now that we've progressed a little bit? I mean, look, at the end of the day, we can't take the mick too much. They didn't have the evidence that we have. And if they had the evidence we have, it may very well be that they would
I do judge them harshly, because there were people at their time who also said this is stupid. Every one of those. There were lots of top biologists and naturalists and geologists, whatever, of their day who criticised these people for their theories. There was, against Darwin, you had Louis Agassiz, you had Alfred Russel Wallace, the co-discoverer of natural selection, who believed in intelligent evolution. Yeah. He believed that natural selection was a real mechanism, but it was directed by a higher power to reach the stage of me and you, to explain the human mind. Extremely smart guy. You had Richard Owen, who said that there were features of biology which couldn't be explained by Darwin's theory. So you had lots of people of their day who said that theories don't work. But I think what happened is because the intellectuals of their day were basically discarding Christianity, they wanted justification. They wanted scientific justification for their stance. Because they essentially wanted to be rid of everything. They want to be rid of an interfering God. They'd got rid of revelation, but now they wanted him out of science as well.
So basically they were atheists first and scientists second.
So that's why these theories got so much currency. Okay, so the steady state theory basically says that the universe has been here forever. It's eternal. It's past eternal. Right? It's always been here. What's happened to that theory? Why is it? Why do we have this new theory?
Well, it got thrown out the window because of the new evidence, and to the great consternation of many of the scientists of the day, and secretly, I think, to many of the scientists of today as well. And the reason is because what they basically showed, what the evidence showed, firstly from the redshift of galaxies, showing that all of matter and space and time was moving away from other points in the universe. And then many decades later, with the discovery of cosmic microwave background radiation, which is the
afterglow,
the after noise, the popping sound, a residue from the Big Bang. They effectively discovered that all of space and time originated from a single point, smaller than my little pinky.
And that's small.
So, and in actual fact, a lot of people don't know that the Big Bang was not coined as a term of, it's a big bang. No. Fred Hoyle, who is a prize-winning astrophysicist, he coined it as a derogatory term on BBC Radio 4. He was talking about it, and he said, "What do you think this is? Some kind of a Big Bang?" And the term stuck. So we've thrown out the steady state theory. Is there anything interesting about the universe that we've discovered in the meantime? I
think there is. I think you're asking me about the fine tuning.
That is correct.
So the fine tuning of the universe is super interesting. 20th century science has unearthed a host of new discoveries which show us that the universe is exquisitely fine-tuned to permit living organisms to exist.
So like 1 in 5?
No, like 1 in... You can't think of the number, it's too big.
Okay.
Basically, it seems, or actually they've basically proven it's establishment science. There aren't questions about this. That the universe's initial conditions, so it's initial conditions of the stuff in the singularity, in the Big Bang, and also the laws which govern how the stuff works and how the stuff operates and interacts with each other. The laws and the initial conditions were exquisitely fine-tuned to allow life to exist. By which I mean, if any one of them was out by even a hair's breadth, then life wouldn't be possible.
Okay, so what kind of probabilities are we talking about with one of these constants?
Like, imagine a room full of zeros. Imagine a library full of zeros. Okay? Just books full of zeros. That kind of probability for like one of them.
Okay.
And there are lots and lots and lots of these conditions. And obviously you have to multiply the improbabilities by each other. And it's actually a huge problem in physics today, because they're like, this is kind of hot in here, isn't it? It seems to be pointing towards a designer. Because, why should there be any value attached to life being allowed to exist? If the universe was any different, then galaxies would pull apart too quickly. Or the universe would pull apart too quickly. Or you wouldn't have planets forming. So you wouldn't have life being allowed to exist.
You wouldn't have the collapse of stars. You wouldn't have the production of elements. You wouldn't have production of planets. You wouldn't have the formation of water or oxygen or carbon dioxide or any...
And life life wouldn't be allowed to exist even if it did start, right? Or it would be impossible for it to start, I should say. So this is another problem. They've tried to address this by inventing a multiverse theory, that there are lots and lots of universes.
What's the multiverse theory?
Multiverse theory is basically, it's no problem, we'll just say there are that many universes, and all of them have different initial conditions, and all of them have different laws of nature.
But that doesn't quite make sense, because at the end of the day, they can't see any of those universes.
Yeah, it's completely unfalsifiable, which is one of the core tenets of science, is that you should actually have theories which you can prove wrong.
But if the only universe they have to look at is our universe, and this universe is very finely tuned, then surely the only rational conclusion from that should be that if there are any other universes, they should also be finely tuned. When you're n equals 1, you can't posit that the second universe is different to the first universe.
That you're an exception.
There could very well be other universes, but who's to say they're not just as finely tuned as this one?
I guess, in summary, the multiverse is a completely unscientific theory, essentially. Because it says that there are lots of universes out there, which we cannot, in principle, test,
Yeah.
which we cannot, in principle, verify.
Yeah.
And we can't ever know if actually there's life in those as well. Because
Yeah.
it may be, as you've just said, there are lots of universes, but they also have life.
Yeah.
They don't know anything like that. So it's actually just it's a rather pathetic attempt to get away from the actual problem, which is that the universe is exquisitely designed for life.
And this seems to be the main concern of cosmologists these days.
Yeah, I know.
Just proving the multiverse exists, or that it's possible, just so that they can...
You see it in Doctor Strange, you see it in The Flash. Not that I watch comic book stuff all the time.
But yeah, it's everywhere.
And it's a real shame because, I mean, it may well just be a gigantic waste of time, for one.
Yeah. And it's bad science.
It's bad science, and it shows us actually that it's a problem. It shows us that actually the science is pointing the other way.
Yeah.
As David Belinsky says, if you see a horde of people running one way, you should ask, are they going somewhere or are they running away from somewhere? Okay, so we've talked about the Big Bang Theory, which shows that actually you need some kind of first cause. The fine-tuning, which shows that you need some kind of designing intelligence. What about abiogenesis, which is something we mentioned earlier?
So, biogenesis, biological origins, from inorganic matter.
Okay.
And they used to believe it was the sludge at the bottom of the sea,
Yeah.
the protoplasmic mud, the Victorian sludge of different types.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that doesn't stand, because that protoplasmic sludge isn't simple. It's chock full of bacteria, of mycoplasma, and when you look at these under a microscope, we call them simple in comparison to complex organisms like you, me, giraffe, other biological multicellular organisms.
Yeah.
But in comparison to your car, to aeroplanes, to heavy machinery, to industrial, things we use, to your MacBook, to your phone, mycoplasma is way, way, way more complicated, orders of complexity higher. So when actually you look at the original stuff, it's actually not simple at all. It's highly complex. And that's problematic because they wanted something simple to be able to say all of this complexity came from this simple stuff.
And then it just got a little bit, tiny steps from something which is pretty simple to something a bit less simple, blah, 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 blah.
Absolutely. And the idea was that if you begin with something simple, then at least you've got a simple basis for biological development.
And then you have replication, then you have copying errors, and you get everything.
Well, that takes us nicely onto evolution.
Yeah.
So what is it about evolution that really requires an intelligent design?
So evolution is basically the process by which you get from relatively simple organisms, though they're not that simple, you have molecular machines, you have nanobot technology in them, nanobots, to things that are relatively much more complex. So me and you.
Yeah.
Or, big mammals, or, all these kind of complex animals that we see around us.
Yeah.
It's the process of development from the relatively simple to the relatively complex.
Yeah.
But the mechanism, which is posited by Darwinians, which is the standard theory in today's biological world, is that actually you had that original thing, which turns out not to be quite that simple. It's actually quite complex.
Yeah.
And in its DNA, you just have lots of typos.
Typos?
Yeah, you have lots of copying errors.
Okay.
And if you put together enough copying errors, you get brand new, really interesting new features of life.
Right. So what is DNA really? What are you saying there? It's code, basically.
Yeah.
It's like the sentence that you might write. So when you type out your story, it's like your Harry Potter, your Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Different words are like different protein codes, aren't
Yeah.
they? Only you might have, in this case, you have 4 letters, and they code for different amino acids, and the different linear structure or the sequence of the amino acids will fold into a particular shape to give a specific function for that particular protein.
Yeah.
So actually there are quite a few layers of information there beyond just the initial linear sequence.
So what you're saying there, it's not just chemistry, it's information.
It is.
And I think that's actually a really important distinction, because it's not just the physical qualities of the DNA. It's not the physicochemical properties of the nucleotides itself, which produces the amino acids, the amino acid sequences, which then fold in a specific way to produce proteins. Proteins make the cells.
Yeah.
It's actually how you line them up. So it's actually it's like an alphabet, as you say.
Yeah.
It's like words in a sentence.
Yeah.
The way that they're lined up, which is not something which is determined by their chemical qualities.
Yeah, and that is the key point.
Determines
their function.
Their function.
Absolutely.
And what you find both in the original cell, which turns out to be extraordinarily complex.
A self-replicating organism, which requires ribosomes.
Which requires that DNA, which requires that genetic information.
Yeah.
And what you find in new forms of life, so as you climb that ladder of evolution, you have more genetic and biological novelty, and it needs more genetic information.
Yeah.
you find that actually you're not going to get that by simply having copying errors in the original DNA.
So what kind of copying errors are you talking about? So we're talking about, like, you take Tolkien's work, Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, you take Tolkien's work and you just get someone to blindly copy it out for decades, let's say. Let's say in this case decades.
Without any spell checker.
Yeah, and the idea is that eventually you get Harry Potter. Which I think would be an improvement on Lord of the Rings. But that's probably the most controversial thing I've said in this video.
Okay, so do people... So you're saying that... So that's what people believe, what happened to...
That's the mechanism of evolution. It's random variation.
So hold on,
it's random mutation.
If that's the case, then we should see non-functioning books.
Yeah.
Books that don't, never reached Harry Potter.
But we don't see that. But we don't.
Do we see
that
that biologically?
No, you don't see that at all. What you do see when you do see some mutations, because obviously mutation is a real process, it does happen.
Yeah.
You see
Cancers.
You see deformed
Yeah.
organisms, right?
Yeah.
That's what you observe. That's the observable science of evolution.
Yeah.
It doesn't produce vastly new, innovative biological features.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about then is that in abiogenesis, in the original form of life, you have this extremely complex organism with nanotechnology, with this genetic code which is chock full of information, which isn't something that is determined through chemistry.
Yeah.
And then to produce all the new life up the evolutionary ladder, you require new information.
Yeah.
Which you won't get by copying errors from the original thing, which turns out to be quite complex.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about then is that unlike what they thought in the 19th century,
Yeah.
it turns out in the 20th century and the 21st century, biology requires information.
Yeah.
And information comes from minds.
Yeah.
It doesn't come from pure undirected chemistry.
No, it can't do.
So this is yet another nail in the coffin of scientific atheism, scientific materialism.
This is a very unfashionable belief.
It's very, very unfashionable.
The idea that there is a designing intelligence. Now, we don't necessarily say that points directly to God, but we definitely say that points to an intelligence of some sort.
Yeah, and then I think if you put them together, you do get to something which has the attributes of what you may ascribe to God. Not all of them.
Now, what did Dawkins say about this? Because I believe he's on camera being caught admitting this himself, hasn't he?
Yeah, well, he said he famously admitted that one may say that there is actually signs of intelligence in the cell, but the intelligent designer must have been E.T.
Aliens.
Aliens, yeah.
He said this.
He said that, and as you know what, he's not actually being that outlandish in the scientific world.
Yeah.
Francis Crick, who's one of the discoverers of the genetic code, this was his theory.
Okay.
It's basically the idea that you have life seeded on Earth from other planets. And that was designed by aliens. By antelopes. Aliens. Alright, so that was a whistle-stop tour of 20th century science. So what have we learnt overall?
Well, we've learnt that a designer is required for the origin of life, for the fine-tuning of life, for the origin of the universe, and for the evolution of all biological organisms.
So that seems to be quite a bit of science.
I know.
So when atheists say that there's just no evidence for God, what are they talking about?
I don't really know.
Because if you look at these domains, and there are others,
Yeah.
but if you look at these, you'll be like, okay, well, there seems to be some kind of eternal entity which had to produce the non-eternal Big Bang and the non-eternal universe, right?
Yeah.
And it would make sense that that eternal entity is highly intelligent and conscious and very, very powerful because it not only produced the universe, but it also finely tuned all of its parameters and laws and constants.
Right.
And then not only that, but it didn't just set it up as some kind of clockwork universe.
Yeah.
It actually seems to be directing all the processes with all the laws of nature towards certain important events. So like the origin of life.
Yeah.
It seems to be directing the chemistry, let's say, to produce the biology. And then not only that, but it actually seems to be guiding the whole of the evolutionary process towards highly conscious beings like me and you.
Right.
So what we have is a god, essentially. Because what we're saying is then it's eternal, conscious, intelligent, powerful, and omnipresent. Always present, always guiding. Now,
and intervening.
Yeah.
So it's not a deistic god, it's a theistic god as well.
yeah. That seems to tally pretty well with what religion says.
Well, that is exactly what religion says.
So I wouldn't say that. Yeah, I wouldn't say that that's proof of God, in an absolute sense.
No, it's not.
I would say it's very, very strong evidence for God.
Yeah, and
Right?
it makes the belief highly logically plausible. In fact, logically very probable. In fact, one could.
In fact, it makes you unreasonable to be an atheist in light of the scientific evidence. To be honest.
Yeah, and it makes it inevitable.
Yeah.
Right.
And what it should actually make us think is that if there's all this evidence pointing towards some kind of entity which is conscious, eternal, designing, then it seems to have quite an interest in us.
Yeah.
And shouldn't, therefore, we have had some kind of contact with this being? Because, even the most average person out there doesn't do things for no reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
If an average person doesn't do something for no reason, then why would this being make the whole universe for no reason? Well, thanks very much for watching. We've been Rational Religion. Make sure you subscribe below and also comment to keep the discussion going. We're going to be exploring more of these topics and completely different topics in future episodes of Believe You Me.
Peace be upon you.